organization. And within that organization, I'm the North American lead for desktop and application virtualization. And so I work with a lot of clients, business partners, and other IBMers to help understand desktop and application virtualization needs and design solutions accordingly. So one of the things we wanted to talk about with you today is, why do you want to look at IBM for desktop and application virtualization? What do we have to offer? And we also wanted to talk to you a little bit about our relationship with Atlantis and the teaming that we're doing with them and going to market and the benefits our customers can derive from that. So with that, I'm going to jump in. I would encourage you to ask any questions that you've got via the questions option in the GoToWebinar window. It should be on the right side of your screen. And if there's anything I can do, please let me know. And with that, I'm going to move forward into the presentation. So this is a question we get quite a lot here at IBM. There's lots of options in this space, so why do you want to work with IBM? How are we different? And one way we're different is the approach that we've taken with our Smart Cloud Desktop Infrastructure, or SDI, reference architecture. At the outset, when we were looking at how we wanted to approach putting this reference architecture together, we came up with 3 key things that we wanted to make sure we drove into our reference architecture. And one of those is choice. That was the first and foremost. There's more than one way to skin the cat. And we wanted to make sure that we did not limit our clients' options, but in fact open them up so that regardless of what their business drivers or technical requirements are, IBM stood ready to help and had a solution that would work for them. Reliability is very, very important in a desktop virtualization solution. You're moving from single points of failure where 1 or 2 people are affected to an enterprise architecture where if you lose a server, it's not 1 or 2 people that are affected. It could be 50, it could be 100. And that's something we want to help mitigate. We all know in IT that failure will occur. It's how your solution responds to it that is going to be the judge of that character, if you will. And so we've tried to take an approach that gave us the broadest high availability and disaster recovery options possible in the solution space. And last, and certainly by no means least, was expertise. So IBM has been involved in the desktop and application virtualization space in many forms since the mid-90s. And one fact that most people don't know is that IBM is actually the largest integrator for Citrix anywhere in the world. And that's pretty heady room. There's a lot of people playing in this space, and the fact that we are the largest single integrator for Citrix speaks to the depth of our involvement in this particular solution space. Now, to be sure, we don't just do Citrix, right? Which is what probably makes that fact a lot more compelling, because we do a lot of VMware View, and we also do Microsoft VDI. So when we start looking at those things, the fact that we're the single largest integrator for Citrix is saying something, because that's just a part of the business that we do in this particular space. So we are driving our expertise and our experience into our solution design every single day so that our clients and our partners get the benefit of that expertise and those hard lessons learned, because to be sure, there were a lot of hard lessons learned along that road to success. So as we move forward, and we want to talk about choice, we wanted to ensure choice in every facet. So we've got a very diverse portfolio of hardware systems, from high-end systems with 4 sockets, our EX5 and our X6 product lines, all the way into our blade and integrated systems with our Blade Center technology as well as IBM PureSystems technology. But we have other things. There's a lot of times where a client may only have a need for a couple of rack servers, and that's sufficient because of their specific requirements. And we wanted to make sure we could handle that. If you aren't, maybe you're a small shop and you deal more with tower servers than rack servers, that's okay. Those servers are still in play for a solution like this. There's nothing that says that they can't be. It's about offering the right solution for each and every customer. If you're doing a lot of 3D virtualization or you have 3D virtualization needs, the system like iDataplex and NextScale in order to meet the demands of what it is you're looking for. It may be that you or your client want dense capacity from a compute perspective, but you don't want everything else, the server or the storage and the networking and everything else included in it, and that's fine. That's where NextScale can really come in and play a role. So it really doesn't matter if you want a fully converged system, a very, very dense system, small systems, or high-performance systems. We've got all of those built into our reference architecture, and we support all of them. But we don't just support all of the hardware platforms. We support all of the desktop brokers across those platforms. And that's where, you know, that breadth of expertise really comes in, because while I am in the systems and technology group of IBM, which is where the X86 hardware is created and designed and sold, there's a lot more to being successful with desktop and app virtualization than just hardware widgets, right? There's all of the nuances in the integration with your Active Directory structure, with your group policies, with your security teams and firewall settings, and all kinds of things that you have to know to be successful in implementing this. And we bring that to the table, not just in one area such as Citrix, but with Citrix, Microsoft, or VMware's Horizon View products. And so it really doesn't matter what direction you want to go, we can help you be successful with it. So when you look at our SDI reference architecture, we really wanted to, you know, make sure that there was a structure to it, if you will, but also make sure that it was flexible. So we've tested with ESX, we've tested with Hyper-V, we've tested some with Zen Server. We've got, at this point in time, close to $65 million in hardware sales that are attached to Zen Server. So there's some concern that IBM doesn't support Zen Server, and that concern, while it's I think at least at a high level legitimate, the one thing that everybody needs to understand is that we work with Zen Server. There's a lot of other customers out there already running Zen Server on top of X86 through what we call our SPORE process. So if you're looking at desktop virtualization and for some reason you decide, hey, I really want to run Zen Server, maybe you like their pass-through capabilities with virtual GPUs, maybe you like their virtual GPU sharing capabilities, maybe you just like Zen Server. Don't rule us out. What you want to do is work with your business partner and your account team to get the SPORE process, because there's a really good likelihood that we've already approved one just like yours, and probably multiple ones just like yours. So we really are trying to be a little different and be more inclusive in what we're doing with the entire spectrum. And so, again, if you need rack-based, we've got that. You want chassis-based and density, or you want a purely converged system, we can provide that. But one of the big things with desktop virtualization that really trips people up from a cost perspective is storage. And so one of the first things we wanted to do was to ensure that we could provide options, whether that be N-Series and NetApp or be it the V3700 or the IBM SAN volume controller or EMC or HP or Dell. Maybe you don't want any of those. Maybe you want to use local storage for your non-persistent virtual desktops. That's good. We've done that testing. We can provide guidance to you on where that works and how that works, and how you can benefit. And that can really reduce your cost structure associated per user with implementing desktop and application virtualization. So we've done the hard work. We've documented that in our reference architecture, and we'll go over that a little bit more. This slide is frankly, it's a bit redundant. I forgot to take it out of the pitch, but it really just reinforces that we have scalable, flexible solutions that are highly integrated with Flex Systems, N-Series, V7000, and our PureFlex product line. So you want to go small, you want to go big, you want to go somewhere in between, we're there. Now, our flexible storage options, when you start looking at this, you heard me say we can do SVC, we can do V7000, we can do XIV, we can do EMC, HP, Dell. We don't care. And the reason we don't is we've got a storage virtualization technology built into the V7000 that is inherent to the SAN volume controller technology, which allows us to put any storage vendor's controller behind either the V7000 or the SVC and control it from a single pane of glass. And so to your end users and to the rest of your solution, you're not using 4 or 2 or 3 different disparate pieces of storage. You've got one single point where it all comes together. You can manage it all from a single launch point within the PureFlex, for instance. So that becomes pretty compelling from a operational perspective. At the same time, as I said a few minutes ago, you may have a use case where local disk in your server is sufficient for what it is you're trying to do and what your requirements are. And so we have tested a broad spectrum of hard drives and solid-state drives. My personal favorite in this, when we go with local disk, is to use the Intel S3700 series. They've got 400 gig and 800 gig drives that each drive does 35,000 IOPS. That's pretty darn fast. So depending on your use case, again, that might be a good fit for you and be something that could drastically help you reduce the cost per user by eliminating or at least reducing the need for shared storage. In desktop and app virtualization, one of the key components that you have to have for success in most cases are roaming profiles and folder redirection. So many customers already have that in place, but not all customers do. So we took that into account, and we added the Windows storage servers into our reference architecture to accommodate that workload. So in general, we use file-based storage for file-based needs, and for our VDI virtual machines and that infrastructure, we will generally use a block-based structure. Now, you can use a file-based structure end-to-end, and depending on the size and scalability and the performance you need, that may work for you. Again, this is all documented with guidance on floors and ceilings within the reference architecture. So we really kind of took the approach that again, it's about flexibility and choice, so that does require a different approach, and that means using market standards for testing and verification, things like login VSI and iometer and passmark testing standards to understand, to define and document what's the minimum performance and scalability we can expect out of these pieces and what's the maximum. In truth, because your environment is different than the person's next to you, right? If you go from building to building, block to block in any city, and you start comparing requirements and environments, what you'll find is that there's a lot of uniqueness to each and every client environment. And so we have to take that into account when we say, you know, here's the minimum you can expect and here's the maximum you can expect. The truth is for most solutions, the truth is somewhere in the middle. Now, you may be middle top, you may be middle bottom. It's going to depend on your use case. So you heard me say a little bit ago that storage is one of the largest cost factors associated with desktop and application virtualization. And that's probably not news to most of you anyway. But you know, more to the point, it's about balancing the user experience and the cost. And so we don't want to provide a less than stellar user experience. And if you look back historically at what we've done in the desktop virtualization space to provide adequate user experience, most of the things that we didn't really work out too well for most customers. So take into account that when you're on a physical PC or desktop, you're getting 100 to 120 IOPS per second, or IOs per second, what we call IOPS, from the disk up to the compute where you're seeing it on the screen. And so that's not a lot per individual, but now let's multiply that by 1,000 users. Now we're talking a lot of IOs, a lot of IOPS. So as a rule of thumb, we planned on 26 to 42 IOPS per user when we were doing architecture and design for VDI for a very long time. And then we would go in and tweak the image and turn off indexing and other non-essential user features in the image. And then what would happen is we would roll that out, and it would be faster on boot and login and things of that nature, and that looked pretty good. But every once in a while, there was something you'd have to do that required one of those features that we turned off. And as soon as that you hit that need, of course, user satisfaction, you know, is going to take a hit. And the other thing to take into account is even if we're doing 42 IOPS per second, that's a third of the IOPS that the user had when they were using physical desktops and physical laptops. And so the logic in and of itself just tells you that there's no way we're going to deliver the same user experience or better unless we change something fundamental in what we're doing. And so Atlantis ILIO allowed us to do that. So when we started looking at this, they do I/O caching as well as data deduplication and compression. And so the I/O caching allows us to provide much better user experience. So now instead of 42 IOPS per user, when we tested this with our V7000, we were at 297 IOPS per user. So now we've actually improved the user experience. When we tested this with FlashSystem, we were at 387 IOPS per user. We did some base testing with FlashRAM inside of one of our X86 servers, actually, a couple of months ago, and we got 3 million IOPS on a single box. So what that told us is we had great capability to deliver IOPS and improve user experience greatly. The other side of that is because they do perform inline data deduplication at the server before the data is ever written out to the storage, and it's compressed again before it goes out of the server and into the storage, we were able to save anywhere from 78% to 97% storage capacity. That's a significant storage capacity savings. But along with that, that means I'm not writing IOPS, I'm not reading IOPS. All of those things are true. So not only am I able to reduce my storage capacity, but because I'm reducing my IOPS to the back-end storage, I may not need the biggest, fastest storage controller out there. And even if I do decide to go that direction, I won't need nearly as much of it, so it becomes far more affordable for me. So as we move on, I'm going to share a couple of pieces of data from our Smart Cloud Desktop Infrastructure, or SDI, reference architecture. Because one of the things that we wanted to find out is how do the user densities vary? You know, how many virtual desktops can a single server host? You know, and it depends. How much storage do I need for my virtual desktops? Again, it depends. Realistically, most customers don't like that. And so we get variant IOPS results when we start changing the fitness of the operating system that the users are going to leverage. We start getting variances when we change out the protocol, the display protocol that's being used. And as we change out different server components, that can also have an impact. So if we modify the RAM settings, for instance. In this testing, what we did is we tried to use the same server with the same processors, and what we did is we modified things like the amount of RAM and the clock speed of that RAM. And that's where we started. That was one of our key starting points. So nobody likes it depends, but we can provide you data at least to narrow that down for you. And as we look through here, one of the things that we wanted to understand is like the impact of the memory frequency, right? If I go from 1600 megahertz down to 1066, does that affect the density? And the answer, pardon me, was yes. But it wasn't a quantifiable yes. It was, you know, it does seem to affect it, but it's not, it seems negligible, but we couldn't find a whole lot of data to quantify that. And so what we found is that by going from 1600 to 1066, we did, in fact, get 5 less users per server. Now, when you look at the cost differences between 1600 megahertz RAM and 1066 megahertz RAM, is 5 users a big deal, or is that actually a pretty good way to go because I could reduce my cost significant enough to, you know, make those 5 users worth losing, in essence? And the answer was, yeah, it really can save me money, and it's a negligible difference, and we've got quantifiable data to support that in our reference architecture. So if you look at it, there is some end-to-end guidance on 1,500 users. We've provided diagrams on what the networking looks like on the fiber channel and Ethernet side within a flex chassis, and we extended our end-to-end guidance from 1,500 users to show you what it would look like to support 4,500 users. Now, I tell you all of this because what our reference architecture is a lot of data to allow our clients to intelligently make decisions for themselves. What it is not is spoon-feeding you step for step what you have to do to make that happen. And we took that approach for a couple of reasons, but primarily when we started talking to our clients, what we found was that, you know, frankly, they had some really, really good engineers, highly intelligent, and they were starving for information to make decisions with. So our starting point was develop the information and document that and give our clients who are very intelligent the ability to help themselves. And so when you look at our reference architecture, that's the way you have to look at it. It is there for those customers who have that deep engineering skill and the ability to take this data and translate that into solutions that matter to them. Now, that doesn't mean that IBM's not here for you to help you do that. That doesn't mean that your business partner's not here to help you do that. Of course, we would love the opportunity to help you be successful with this in a more personal way. But this is a really good starting point for that effort. It's not the end point. So to that end, one of the things that we've done recently is we created some configurations for small, medium, and large, from 250 users up to 1,500 users, as starting point configuration for clients. It doesn't include every option that you could possibly throw in, But if you've got 1,500 users or 2,000 users and you want to start small with a pilot or a POC, start with our small configuration. And there are options in there to add varying types of storage, to add licenses for Microsoft, Atlantis, VMware, different things of that nature, as you see fit. But at least the base work was done on the RAM and the CPU computations and number of servers and network information, so that at least it gives you a really good starting point that if you like what you're seeing, you can then scale that up and be successful with it. It's not, you don't have to throw it away and start from scratch to build something to get up to the large configuration. You can grow from that. And if you're a large configuration, if you've got 1,500 users and you know what, you've already done a VDI 1.0 or 2.0 and you're looking for that long-term home to put it on that makes sense, then our large configuration may in fact make sense for you. And I would ask you to take a look at it. Any of your business partners or your IBM technical sellers can help you with that. So as we move through here, we had some work that we did with the National Bank of Moldova with a 3D workload need that they had. And that's the most challenging workload still to conquer in the desktop and application virtualization space. And so we ended up using the IBM iDataPlex with NVIDIA's K2 grid cards, and we were able to drive a lot of value for them in that solution. When you start looking at VDI densities, most people want to get 100 per server, and our PureFlex 10U footprint. And so depending on what you're doing, you might get 800 to 1,500 users in a chassis, right, as an example. So when we say a maximum of 574 users per rack, that probably doesn't seem that impressive to you. But it's a 3D virtualized workload. And trust me, 574 users in that, packed that densely, is extremely good and very, very compelling for clients who have that need. And so this was just one particular win, and it was using Citrix Zen Desktop with Citrix Zen Server and the NVIDIA K2 cards. And the client was very, very thrilled with the performance and the overall value that they were able to receive for that particular solution. As we move on, we're not just about handling the most difficult workloads in 3D, but we also have other challenging things like university or hospitals. And so the University Hospitals of Leicester, which is over in the UK, had a significant need with over 14,000 users between doctors, nurses, staff, and other clinicians. And they were getting abysmal boot times, and they had the same challenge that you and I have, right? If you're in an enterprise and you're doing a refresh every 3 to 5 years, and of course your budget for that refresh gets cut by 60% every year, what ends up happening is you've got a really aged fleet of computers, and maintaining those and doing refreshes becomes very, very difficult and daunting. So we went with, when we went to work to help them, we ended up using a VMware Horizon View solution with IBM PureFlex, and Atlantis ILIO was also involved. But you'll notice that we said Atlantis ILIO diskless. So what that meant is we really took out the cost of shared storage, cut the cost dramatically by doing that, and significantly improved the user experience. So when you're able to have a story where you can say we had a 50% CapEx reduction per computer, that's pretty impressive. And to be able to boot in 5 seconds a Windows virtual machine and have it there for login is pretty incredible. If you've ever booted Windows up even off a solid-state drive on a really fast computer, you know that 5 seconds is pretty darn impressive. So as we move forward, I kind of want to switch just for a second if I can, so I ask for just a bit of patience. Hang on, let me go find it. So I did this at Citrix Synergy recently, this particular presentation, and I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So what I did is I was asked to kind of speak to why are we partnering with Atlantis Computing, right? What makes them so special? I think the thing that makes them so special is that they help our customers achieve their goals and lower their costs all at the same time. That's a hard thing to do. There are other software-defined storage companies out there, to be sure, and they are all good in their own right, but we found that at least for desktop and application virtualization, the one with the most compelling solution that drove the greatest value for our clients was Atlantis Computing. So I've talked to you a little bit about what they do, and that's, you know, they do I/O caching locally on each server. They do inline deduplication at each server before it ever gets written to storage. They do compression of that data before it gets written to storage. All of those things are good, right? And they're very, very, very important. But it really gets back to what problem are we trying to solve when somebody says, why Atlantis Computing? And so the technical answer to that is as follows, right? I told you some of the things we did to try to in the industry to alleviate the negative impacts on end user performance by turning off indexing and other features. And we've tried lots of different tricks to reduce the amount of churn and I/O going on between the VDI virtual machine and the back-end storage. Most of them, you know, didn't turn out too well. And so I've been doing this since 2007, and I've seen most of what we tried to do, and some of it was pretty ingenious, and other ideas were a little more questionable. But we've seen in the desktop and app virtualization space the emergence of things like tiered storage being part of an integral to desktop and application virtualization solutions. And I think that was a phenomenal start, but the challenge with tiering, at least some of the tiered storage solutions I saw a few years ago, is it wasn't what you would call easy to implement. You had to know when your data was going to get hot, where it was coming from. You had to manually go in and tell the system what to do, how to do it, and when to do it, and hope that you got it right. That means we have a lot of human error involved in that, and we didn't always get it right. And so there was a lot of complexity involved in it. But beyond complexity, it wasn't even what you would call cheap. It changed our storage footprint. So I didn't have to have nearly as much spinning disk, because I could augment spinning disk with solid state disk and reduce my physical footprint, but the cost of the solid state disk wasn't what you would call inexpensive. So I didn't necessarily get a large reduction in my acquisition cost, even though I might have saved on some footprint, power, and cooling. But that was about it. And so it didn't get us all the way where we needed to be. And then we saw this emergence, and we gave birth to this niche market with storage vendors like Nimble and Tentry and Pure and Extreme and Whiptail and all of these other vendors. Now, they were really, you know, a change, because this is all flash. So I really reduced my footprint. Now I'm down to 2U, 4U, 6U, something along those lines. And, you know, that's a big difference in the storage footprint. So that's probably going to help me a lot more. But then you start looking at the cost of it, and you're looking at $250,000, $500,000, $1 million, depending on what you need. If you're in an enterprise, it got really expensive. And so that didn't solve the problem entirely either. It moved it. I got better user performance. I had, greener footprint, but it was still pretty costly. So how do we solve that problem once and for all? And I think the answer to that is we have to look at the data points we have in front of us, because the answer's been there the whole time. And the answer is we're trying to solve the problem in the wrong place. We have been saying for years that storage is the problem, when in fact storage is not the problem. It is the victim of the problem. The problem is the level of duplication of data. When you look at a Windows 7 64-bit virtual machine and you've got 1,000 of them, that base image is the same for all 1,000 users in most cases. And I'm saving that data on very expensive shared storage uniquely for every one of those users. And when every one of those VMs boot up, I have to read and write those IOPS uniquely for each one of those VDIs. And therein lies the problem. The problem at the server side, the problem is with the level of duplication and the way we architect VDI, and some things are just immutable, and that's the problem we've got to deal with. And so that's what Atlantis allows us to do. And one way of looking at this, and the analogy that I've used for a lot of years, or for a year now, I guess, is storage is our highway, and we've built bigger, faster highways. We've increased the speed limit. We've increased the number of lanes. We've put in an HOV lane. We've done all kinds of things to try to solve the problem by modifying the interstate, when in fact what we have to recognize is that we've got a problem where we've got 1 million commuters, right? And those commuters are our IOPS, what we're reading and writing. And our entrance ramps to the highways are egress from the server and into the storage. And that's fundamentally our problem. Our entrance ramps have become clogged. Our entrance ramps are trying to put too much onto these highways, and without any intelligent thought into it. And so what we're doing with Atlantis is we're basically saying, look, you 7 or 8 guys, y'all are all going to the same spot, so you're going to take one car. So we're enforcing intelligent carpooling, right? And the other thing that they're doing, we'll go on the read IOPS for a second, is they're really saying you don't have to go here to read this because I've already read this for you. I went to the store for you, right? So it's like your neighbor's going to the store, and you got to pick up some bottled water or something, and they bring it back for you. That's one less car that has to go out there and deal with that. You just give them the money to take care of it. And so if you look at what it is we're doing, we're being far more intelligent with the traffic before it ever hits the entrance ramp, so that we get more out of the highway infrastructure that we've already built. And the only way that I know to do that comprehensively today is with Atlantis Computing, and that's why we've partnered with them. So if you start looking at our IBM solutions for VDI optimized with Atlantis ILIO, we reduce the cost and the complexity of these solutions significantly, and we can drive the cost down per user to lower than the cost of a physical PC. Now let that sink in, because that's not been feasible today. And anytime you did try to do that, what you ended up doing was negatively impacting the user experience. So we're basically saying we can improve your user experience, and we can lower the overall cost for delivery simultaneously. That's pretty impressive. We're now talking, if we use spinning disk with our V7000, 297 IOPS per user compared to 120 on a spinning disk within a PC, and that's being gracious. So that's pretty significant uptick in the user experience. From a deployment risks, we know that your users are going to be much more receptive So that lowers a lot of the risk of the end users revolting. We reduce the risks in the cost structure, which again gives you a greater chance of success. And we now allow for a lot more automation, and we can deploy 500 desktops in the time it took you maybe to do 10 previously. So that is a much, much lower risk, and that automation that we can help drive into these solutions also takes human error out of the loop, which further reduces that risk. And so we have proven management at scale. So these Atlantis ILIO virtual machines that we have on each and every hypervisor that's providing support to VDI are clustered together. If I lose a server, my users can come up on another server within the 2 to 3 minutes it takes for them to realize their session's gone and log back in. They'll come up on another session. But and we could have all of that data intact for anything that they've got, persistent or non-persistent. So that's pretty impressive stuff when you look at it. This is just another way of saying the same thing I just did. But one test I want to tell you about, we were working with a client out in the Midwest, and they had been using one of our competitors' systems, and they had 200 users, and it took them a couple of hours to boot them up, to get them all booted up and ready to go. And once we put Atlantis in with, well, what we did is we did a kind of a tiered approach to rolling it in because we wanted to be able to quantify that for the customer, the impact at each step. So we did PureFlex X222s with IBM's V840, the FlashSystem solution. And we had 4 compute nodes running VDI, and we were able to boot up 500 VDIs in 52 minutes on that system versus 200 in a couple of hours. So that's a pretty significant improvement in boot times. When we added Atlantis ILIO into the mix, we dropped that boot time from 52 minutes to 10 minutes for 500 users. Now, stop and think about that. That's huge, and from a performance perspective. Now, one may say, well, that's just the boot up time. That doesn't necessarily impact the user experience, and you would be right. That's a true statement. It does not necessarily impact the user experience at that point. So what we did is we helped the client run some tests, and they basically had a dozen applications built into their VDI image, and we helped them script launching those applications and measuring the time it took to launch and have those applications usable. In every case that we tested, it was 2 to 3 minutes. When we add FlashSystem in there, it drops it down to 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. There's just so much that you have to do. It just is what it is. But so FlashSystem did have a significant improvement over spinning disk. But when we put Atlantis ILIO in and we ran the exact same test, it was 10 to 12 seconds every single time. 10 to 12 seconds to launch a dozen applications and have them actually usable. Now that is a valid measure of user experience, because you don't want your users having to wait for prolonged periods of time for applications to come up so that they can do their data entry or send out an email or whatever. The faster it is, the more likely they are to accept the solution and champion it for you, in fact, through your line of business. So as we look at all of this, just a wrap up, with IBM Flex and Atlantis, we're cheaper than a physical PC. That's saying something. Faster than a MacBook Air with a solid-state drive. It's a simplified architecture for rolling out from your VDI team or your virtualization team, and we have proven scalability. We are doing this in some of the, Atlantis, I should say, is doing this in some of the largest banks in the world. Together, we are doing this with Atlantis and some of the largest banks in the world. So it has scalability. It has a track record of success, and that's why we're kind of bringing it to market. So this gives you an idea for this next slide of our storage reduction that we were able to achieve with persistent VDI. And so the red is the storage capacity necessary before Atlantis ILIO, and the blue is after Atlantis ILIO, or with Atlantis ILIO. That's pretty significant. And the next piece that I'll show you is just some of the performance comparison. And this was V7000, which is a spinning disk solution. It can be a tiered solution with solid state and spinning disk, but in this case it was spinning disk. And we absolutely smoked an Intel SSD. From a boot time perspective, that's pretty darn compelling. So the other thing is when we started looking at some of the clients that we were working with from a capacity reduction perspective, we had one client we did a test with 75 users, and each user had a 12 gig write-back cache. They were using Citrix Desktop. And so that's a lot of storage for 75 users when you add all of that up. But what we actually consumed, right, was a lot different than what was assigned to the users because of the inline dedupe and the compression. Instead of each user actually consuming all 12 gig per user, we had a total of 7 gig of capacity used to support those 75 users. And it's all because of the inline dedupe and the compression that Atlantis performs on the workload before it ever gets written out to the storage on the back end. So all of those things are impressive. But now that we know it works technically, what about the financial case? Does it add, hurt, or is my cost case neutralized or neutral? And so if you look at the IOPS, we went from 30 IOPS on the V7000 solution per user to up to 5,000 in a burst. And we did that with 90% fewer disks. You can imagine that that's going to obviously drive some storage cost savings. And in fact, it did. Now, these are list prices, okay? These are not discounted prices because that just, we would never be able to do apples to apples that way. But this gives us a way to provide apples to apples comparison from one account to the next. And so as we look at this, an $800,000 storage cost saving is pretty significant. That meant we went from $510, which is still really good per desktop, per user for the infrastructure, to under $300. And that gave us a reduction, a 4-year TCO reduction of 63%. So you all may, in fact, see the sysadmins, the architects, the geeks that make this stuff work, right? That's what I am. But at some point, somebody in your chain of command has to say the financial case makes sense. And so we want to make sure that, if you look at this technology and you try it out and you find what we've told you today to be true, which you will, we want to be able to support you with that financial case model, because if we can't, then you're going to be limited in your success in moving your project forward or getting a directional shift to occur within your organization. So with that, I will stop and ask if there are any questions before we go any further.
Matt, at this time, nothing relevant to the current material. So you continue on.
Okay. Well, as you all have questions about what it is we do, we have websites set up. You can search on IBM Smart Cloud Desktop Infrastructure in Google and get to some of our sites. Our solution guides and reference architectures are there. We have X86 blogs as well, and if you need to contact somebody at IBM and you want more information or your client needs more information, then I've included my name and email as well as that of Brandon Harrell, my teammate, for desktop and app virtualization on this slide, and we really, look forward to you all reaching out to us. It's something I get pretty passionate about because I've seen our solutions in action, and I know that, frankly, they're technically superior to our competitions, and we can be competitive on price, if not beat them outright. So anytime you can do both of those things, it's something that should get you excited. If it doesn't, I think there's something wrong with you. But I've done this I've worked with hundreds of clients now, from initial design to implementation and full rollout of these solutions. And I came to IBM last year because I believe that the IBM solutions do something that the other players don't. And that is they help us to resolve and handle the operational issues that come up day to day. It's not just about putting something in that will work day one. It's about putting something in that will work day one that you can then hand off to your operational staff and have confidence that they can manage and scale, and that you will achieve the consistency. Consistency in the cost per user should be exactly what you expected for the first user and the last user, and the performance that the last user gets should be exactly what the first user gets. And we can help you create those scalable solutions that deliver that type of consistency. So Ben, with that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Matt. Actually, we did have some questions come in, so I will let you know what those are. So first one, what's Atlantis do for migrating existing PCs to VDI, if anything? I'm guessing that's around management, or doing like a...
Atlantis ILIO doesn't really help you do migrations from physical PCs into a VDI infrastructure, if that's the question. When you're looking at moving from a physical PC construct into a VDI infrastructure, one of the chief things that you need to make sure that you do is, if you don't already have folder direction in place in your IT organization, you need to put it there. You need to make sure you have folder redirection in place and that you've migrated that data onto those network shares, because that's going to be the biggest piece of information that they need. Is they're going to have to be able to access their Word files, Excel, PDFs, and other data, app and otherwise. And the best way to achieve that is not to migrate their image from the physical to a virtual world, but to extract their data from the physical world so that it's accessible in the virtual world. And we do that with folder redirection. And the other thing that we use to achieve a high degree of personalization so that it feels like the customer's old machine is we use roaming profiles. And so that's another piece of technology you'll want to look at to be successful with desktop virtualization as you move forward.
Great. Next question, where does the storage reduction come from? Is it a result of deduplication, compression?
It's a combination of deduplication and compression. But the thing that I'll also elaborate on a little bit more is they do a lot more than just dedupe and compression. They also do a lot of intelligent application analytics on the data, right, to understand what that data is and how compressible it is, and all kinds of intelligence that they've written and designed into their product. But primarily, yeah, the capacity reductions are going to come from those two things, dedupe and compression. And when you look at the fact that you may have 75 machines, all with the same base image on a server, and that you could reduce that just for that base image, you could achieve a 97% capacity savings on your storage. That's pretty impressive. And so that's where a lot of that comes from. So we dedupe it. If it's already been written to disk by one VM and I know it, I can create a pointer to it and I don't have to write it again. So that saves IOPS and it saves capacity. And on that line, one note is a lot of storage vendors, IBM's not one of them, but a lot of storage vendors are starting to put deduplication and things like that on the storage controller. And we have a fundamental issue with that, because when you do that, you're going to create a performance issue. You're going to take a hit, whether that be 15% or 20%. You're going to take a hit, or that storage vendor is going to have to add RAM and processor to mitigate that additional functionality running on that storage controller, which you're going to pay for in terms of the cost of the overall storage controller. Number one. Number two, fundamentally, it's the wrong place to solve the problem. As discussed earlier, the problem starts at the servers with all the duplication of data in those VMs. And if we can solve the problem there before it gets written to storage, then that means I don't have to have my storage controllers burdened with performing those functionalities. It'd be, if you take my analogy from earlier on the highway and extend it a little bit, it would be like, it would be the equivalent of having a police officer at the entrance ramp saying, oh, well, let's put you in with this car over here because they're going over there already, and so you've got all that movement that's occurring. That's still going to cause a slowdown in performance, and not just for the occupants of the vehicle being moved into another vehicle, but for everything behind it. It's a downstream effect. So hope that answers your question.
Yep, I'm sure. Sure. Thanks for that. Next question. Do you know of any technical information out there showing Atlantic versus competition, or is there competition in that space?
Well, frankly, there's a lot of people who want to compete with them right now, and for various legal reasons, I can't name them by name.
There you go.
But I looked at them, and from my perspective, it's not something I would recommend to my clients. Those other solutions are not something I could in good conscience recommend, because they either don't have the level of clustering or management, or they have multiple single points of failure, or they simply add an unacceptable level of complexity to the solution. So now, in terms of utilizing Atlantis ILIO with IBM and how we stack up against things like Nutanix and Extreme IO and things of that nature, in that realm, if you're looking for that, if you contact us, we can absolutely get you that type of information.
Sure. And I will mention there's also a lot of white papers out there on Atlantis' website around implementations with things like VMware vSAN and other products out there where they coincide and work well with them.
Good
point. All right, next question. Yep. Next question is, will the IBM team be able to go into the data center and work with the local client teams and do knowledge transfers and handoffs with the implementation?
Well, that's a long question. Generally speaking, we try to engage with the local teams. We at IBM recently started a North American VDI Center of Competence so that we could spread the knowledge that we've got, we'll say back in the mothership, really, out into our field technical sellers, and we are engaging with partners as well to do some of that knowledge transfer and skills development. And I anticipate at least over the next 6 to 12 months, that's going to continue and in fact increase. I wouldn't want to go on record as saying we're going to be there for every implementation, right? Because that's why we have business partners. We work in conjunction with people like Atlantis, as well as Citrix, VMware, and Microsoft, to make sure that, as our clients are doing these designs and implementations, that they know who the resources are that are available to them and how and when, in fact, to go to them. But from a skills development and knowledge transfer perspective, we are definitely aggressively working with the field to accomplish that.
Great. Makes sense. Well, Matt, again, thank you for your time. We don't have any questions at this point, so I just want to close with a couple mentions. Basically, we've recorded this session, so we'll be sending out an email to all attendees and people who registered and were not able to attend with a link to our wiki page, Virtual User Group wiki page, and in there will be a link to a YouTube recording and then also the slide deck. And then stay tuned also for postings of our next virtual user group. We'll be most likely covering the topic of X6. So our refresh with the Intel E7, latest E7 processor around Ivy Bridge, codename Ivy Bridge. And then also, please connect out to your local account teams to stay apprised of the local events in your area. We've got some PureFlex events and also VDI events around the Midwest, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. So please keep in tune with your local team for those events. And with that, we'll go ahead and close this session. Thanks again for everybody who attended. Have a good day.